Hello again, and continuing with books about firearms and firearms training. And the book we're going to discuss today was written by a good friend of mine, Evan Marshall. And when I first worked with Evan, I already knew him from the gun magazines, where he used to write about officer survival. And he was probably the first guy actually to write about that subject. In fact, I think he coined the term, which was about how police officers can stay alive, um, generally by using tactics, but also he talked about equipment as well. And we first worked together on a bodyguard course in 1988, and then subsequently on lots of other courses, and also we met at trade shows and training conferences, that kind of thing. And one of the big influential things in Evan's life was in the officer survival thing. And he was an officer in Detroit, and in the very early 70s, soft concealable Kevlar body armor was invented by the Second Chance Company, and they were based in Detroit. And Evan was the first police officer to buy a vest. And one of his colleagues, a detective, Ron Jagielski, talked to him about it, thought it was a good idea. He bought a vest, and he was the first officer to be saved using the Kevlar bullet-resistant vest. So back then, you were the subject of scorn if you wore a vest. And police officers are generally conservative and they don't like change. Now, if you don't wear a vest, you're actually subject to sanction. And then another big influential event was the 1986 Miami shootout with the FBI. As a result of that, the FBI convened a wound ballistics panel, and Evan was a member of it. In fact, he was the only police officer on it. They came to the panel came to rather strange conclusions, which culminated in the famous FBI ammunition tests. And the ammunition tests have been criticized because they started off from a rather strange point. They took an arbitrary value, and if the ammunition met that value and standard, then it was rated on a scale. But if it didn't, it had a negative value, which in effect meant that if you were shot with that ammunition, you actually felt better, which is obviously nonsensical. So a lot of people were critical of the FBI's tests. And Evan eventually wrote a book with his ideas, which were usually taken from first-hand accounts of people being shot, and also having a look at recovered ammunition and this kind of thing. So his first book, Handgun Stopping Power, which I had, he gave me a copy, and I loaned it out to somebody, and it's never been seen again. But there was an updated version, which is this one, Street Stoppers, which he co-wrote with Ed Sanow, who is a researcher and also a reserve deputy. And first of all, the term stopping power has come in for a lot of criticism because some people say it doesn't exist. To me, it's an aspiration. It's something you aim to achieve, like liberty and justice. But whether you actually can achieve it's another story. But there's got to be some way of gauging the effectiveness of ammunition, because ammunition can range from 2.2s up to, say, 44 Magnum. So what works? What's effective? What's too much? What's not enough? So all the different ammunition tests seek to find this. Stopping power may be a misnomer, but the search for the ability to quantify it certainly is useful. So various schools of thought on it, and as I say, Evan, and he's coming for a lot of criticism from the people who don't agree with his methodology about it. So some of the other things in the book has got a big section at the start, a big long chapter, which is Gunfights and Ammo, the Big Picture by Keith Jones. Really good, common sense. I don't think anybody could argue with what Mr. Jones says in this. It's a really good overview, and he puts it all into perspective. What is actually the more important things? The not only the FBI conducted ammunition tests, but various other entities did, including the U.S. Secret Service and the Navy and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Details are all in here, and they came to much different conclusions than the FBI at the time with their initial tests. The FBI has revised its tests since then. One of the things I enjoyed particularly in the book is the history of Hydroshock, Starfire, and Quickshock ammunition by Tom Baczynski. Now, Tom Baczynski was the guy who was the ammunition designer. He designed it for different companies, for example, Federal for the Hydroshock and so on. And his search for different ways to produce the incapacitation effect is fascinating. A lot of science in there, a lot of tests. I really thought Hydroshock did the job. It seemed to work. There seemed to be a lot of evidence that it was a good design, and for many years I carried Hydroshock. Some other stuff. Well, the meat of the book for me is the case histories, because every caliber that discussed, there's case histories of people using it in actual confrontations, in gunfights, and that is very, very valuable. The first book, Handgun Stopping Power, had a lot of those, and this book does as well. So it's a lot of value in that. There's also a big section on what was called the Strasbourg tests, which was very controversial, and some people didn't believe that it happened. It was a scientific test where they shot alpine goats with various types of ammunition, and it was supposed to have taken place in Strasbourg, France. As Evan said to me, it took place a bit nearer to Fort Bragg than to France. So the tests obviously did happen. I mean, you couldn't have made up the amount of stuff that it talks about, but it's just an interesting footnote in the talk about ammunition. So really, to sum it all up, if we use Lofty's vital pyramid, mindset's the biggest chunk at the bottom, and then you have tactics, skills, and then the tip of the pyramid is kit or equipment. It's the least important thing, and within that it would be the firearm and the ammo and the specific ammo. Very minor importance compared to things like mindset and tactics. And Evan understands that better than anyone. He's written a book about it. It doesn't mean that this is his Bible, or that he bases his life around. He wrote a book and he's moved on. It's the information is there for everybody who wants to follow it. Ammunition is of lesser importance, but it is of some importance, particularly if you're actually pulling the trigger. So that's a thing to consider. Also, the cases in the book are of lasting importance. They're relevant all the time, because there's new ammo being developed. The book was written many years ago, and there's lots of new ammo out there. Ammo I'm not aware of. It's being developed all the time, and it's all better. It's a continual improvement. I will say that in a lot of cases, the broad conclusions that Evan's book came to have stood the test of time. he was always kind of labelled by a lot of people as being anti-45 because he said the 45 wasn't twice as good as the 9mm as some people claimed, and that they weren't closer. But he wasn't anti-45. First time I ever met him, he was carrying a 45 auto. So there's things like that. It's just looking at the facts as far as you can ascertain them and making conclusions. And a final thing I would say is I was sitting chatting to Evan at a trade show once, and a chap came up and was asking him about ammo, and he must be fed up being asked. And he said, look, he said, whatever you're carrying, just shoot them 4 times in the face. He said, that tends to work. He said, and it solves a lot of the problems about worrying about what type of ammo. So another bit of common sense, really. Great book. I enjoyed it. I reread it frequently, and a lot of very good information from a guy who knows his stuff.